Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Enyugolu. Not guilty of murder. That's the verdict in the trial of the American teenager Kyle Rittenhouse, who fatally shot two men and wounded another during protests last year against the police shooting of a black man on the streets of Kenosha, Wisconsin. Rittenhouse was charged because prosecutors said he went out looking for trouble, but his defense said he feared for his life that night, and a jury has agreed with that view. The case has highlighted the political divide in the US and has fed into the debate about guns and their use in America.
Opted to defend a town that needed someone, and when the police were not numerous enough to take care of it. Kyle was a hero when he decided to clean graffiti off of walls and protect the police and raise money for them. Kyle was a hero well before he raised a gun in self-defense.
When your underlying guts are racism and the systemic runs through this whole system, from the judges to the police to everything, then you got, that's what you're going to get. Somehow we thought that if they sat 12 jurors, we might get a good call, but then it only took a day to do it. So you don't know who was there, what was their thoughts.
We're not asking for a handout. We want your boot off our neck. We want a fair shot, and that includes in the court. We want a level playing field, and not a hill we have to climb and fight with one hand tied behind our back, or a knee in our neck, or a gun to our head, or the head of our children.
Well, for more about the wider implications of the Kyle Rittenhouse case and the impact of his acquittal, I'm joined now from California by Ashton Pemberton, who holds anti-racism workshops for the Harvard Law School and who's been following and speaking about the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Pemberton, for joining us there. First of all, just remind us of the backdrop against which the shootings happened. It was during protests last year against the police shooting of a black man, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So Jacob Blake in Wisconsin was actually left paralyzed by a shooting, and that's what the protests were about. And so I think it's very important to realize that. And I want to also start off by saying that Kyle Rittenhouse, the only reason he ended up in Wisconsin, because he's from Antioch, Illinois, is allegedly to be like a medic. But there's some questions there. Why does a 17-year-old need to be in Wisconsin with the AR-15? So yeah, that's part of the backdrop.
And how much would you say that this case has exposed and deepened the political divide in the United States?
I would say that, the political divide has been there. I think that unfortunately a lot of us are not surprised by this verdict. It seems very intentional, and I think for America, what we fear is, or what a lot of us fear, is that this verdict has actually empowered a lot of other white supremacists and people who feel like they can go to another state to attack and antagonize protesters and possibly kill them. And so I think that it's further the divide. However, I think a lot of us were not surprised by the verdict at all.
The reason I touched on the political divide is that you've got people like President Biden and lots of Democrats expressing concern about the verdict, while some Republicans have welcomed it, including former President Donald Trump, who congratulated Mr. Rittenhouse.
Absolutely. And so like we were saying before, this verdict is bigger than Kyle Rittenhouse. What this verdict does is empowers the person who feels like they can go and attack and antagonize protesters. Once again, Kyle Rittenhouse came from another state. He had medical supplies on him, but once again, what does any medical team in Wisconsin need someone from Illinois for, right? So when we look at Kyle Rittenhouse, a 17-year-old being allowed to come to Wisconsin with an AR-15 is suspicious, and it's hard for people to believe that someone can come from another state with an AR-15 and not have the intent to harm people. And ultimately, that was the impact. When two protesters are killed and 90% of someone's right bicep is destroyed, there seems to be a lot of evil, toxic intentionality there. And I think that that's what a lot of people recognize. And the fact that he has support in people like Trump, who also galvanizes white supremacists and people who are okay with attacking protesters, is very key here.
And to what extent might this not guilty verdict be seen as a sort of referendum on the issue of gun ownership, an issue that clearly polarizes America beyond Kenosha?
So I think that in terms of gun laws, I think that the way in which Kyle Rittenhouse was allowed to have access to the gun, and the defense said that he was in fear of his life and this, that, and the third, but once again, he came across state lines to quote unquote protect private property that he didn't have or own. And so when we think about gun control laws, we have to think about who gets access to these guns and who was protected even when they cause harm and violence. Because if Kyle was not a young white man, would he have been seen as innocent? Would he have been seen as scared? And would police have even allowed him to live after he killed 3 people, regardless of why those people were killed? And so the fact that he has access to those guns in the first place is why there are so many people who are upset about the current gun laws in America. And hopefully this could be sort of a catalyst to change things. But with verdicts like this, people are concerned that change won't be coming soon.
Well, those are very interesting, very enlightening points that you make. And in that context, and in the context of what you said earlier, in terms of the future implications of this verdict, are you worried about what it might mean for future protests? Because you touched on that briefly. In other words, can Americans turn up with guns and not face any consequences?
Well, I think that what we're seeing is that a young white man can come and kill multiple people without facing consequences. And I think that that's part of the reason why people are also upset. This young white man cried in court, tried to make himself seem like the victim, even though he's the one who's alive and he is the one who is now free. So I think that as it relates to future protests, I think the protesters are still going to come in droves. They're good. We still have to fight for justice because we are in an unjust system. This is the criminal injustice system that we are in. And I think that protesters are going to double down because, once again, we are showing that certain lives are more valued than Black lives. And I think that protesters are not going to stop. But I think that, as protesters, there is a reason to be concerned. There is a reason to be scared because now we know that the courts will sanction your death, will normalize your death, will institutionalize and rationalize your death, especially at the hands of young white men who for some reason get access to guns.
But I mean, is it that cut and dry? Because I mean, some might argue that the points you make are rather a bit reactionary, given the fact that the key witness, who was the only survivor of the 3 men who were shot, essentially acknowledged that Kyle Rittenhouse did not shoot at him until he himself pointed his weapon in the direction of Kyle Rittenhouse. And we've got about a minute, so keep it short. Thank you.
Absolutely. And so I think with Kyle Rittenhouse, one of the big things here is that even if Kyle Rittenhouse, had an instance with someone and he was shooting in self-defense in that particular moment, we have to question his intentionality for being in the state of Wisconsin in the first place with the AR-15 as a 17-year-old. It seemed like he was there to antagonize protesters, and you can make the case that that was ultimately his impact, even if in that one isolated case he might have been shooting at someone. And once again, do we think that he would be given the same grace if he was a 17-year-old Black person with an AR-15? And history shows us not, especially because the protesters were about Jacob Blake, an unarmed Black man.
Well, those are very interesting points you make, and I'm sure it will continue to raise questions about the U.S. justice system. Ashton Pemberton from California there, thank you very much indeed for joining us.